Welcome back to another episode of the NBA Fantasy Baller. Why do we call it that? Because we're going to talk about fantasy. We wish we were ballers. I'm tall enough. He's got a basketball jersey, so we're about a tenth of the way there. My name is Nick from CWE. I don't know why I call myself that. Actually, I do know why I call myself that. When I ran a wrestling company, now becoming famous, Johnny Gargano of NXT fame just called me Nick from CWE, and it just stuck, and I used it as my username. His name's Ryan. He's a Cavs fan, so as you know, he's got some deeply rooted problems. But it should be a fun time. Looking forward to doing this. I love basketball. Don't like the Cavs. But I went into that. Ryan, you weren't a part of the first podcast. Just to recap, Phil Jackson is an asshole. I don't know why you'd want to think of trading Kristaps Porzingis. Luckily, they didn't. I saw some of the packages that were circling around for him, but you're just not going to get anything in return for somebody that has the type of potential like that that's going to be worthwhile.
Now, did you just said you saw some of the packages. Did you see the one package in particular they're talking about with Boston? I mean, number 3 this year, the Nets unprotected pick next year, Jaylen Brown, and I think maybe Jay Crowder. Don't get me wrong, I agree. I still wouldn't want to trade a guy with the kind of potential talent, the unreal type skill set, and the type of complete player that Porzingis is. But that's one hell of a haul that you could get back for him if you are content and intent on making that move.
So my biggest thing with that, and it will segue into the next thing to talk about, is that with Porzingis, you at least know what you're getting. We don't really know what Jaylen Brown is. We don't know what Jason Tatum's going to be. We don't know what the Nets pick next year is going to be. At least with Porzingis, you know that it fills a tremendous hole on your team. Now you put him at the 4 and you're running with Horford. You've got Avery Bradley, who's one of the better, he's not one of the best, but he's one of the better defensive guards in the NBA. Isaiah Thomas is a good scorer. You still have Marcus Smart, Terry Rozier, and then you have the haul to go out there to bring in Gordon Hayward in free agency. In my opinion, that sets Boston up really to rival what the Cavs have at that point. And maybe, in my opinion, depending on what moves the Cavs make in the offseason, that might put them just one step above, definitely one step above where they were at this year, but could make it more challenging for the Cavs to get back to the finals next year.
That's the one piece I didn't want to see Boston get. They go out, they could get the Gordon Haywards of the world, the Jimmy Butlers like they were talking about before. Obviously, that's off the table now. They could get Hayward and Paul George, and I still think my Cavs are going to have an edge on those guys, even as currently constructed. That's something we'll probably talk about here a little bit later in the show, but that's something I have a very different opinion of what most people do as far as how drastic of a move the Cavs have to make. Back to Porzingis for a minute. I agree with what you're saying. The guy's legitimately already climbing the ranks as being one of the top players in the game. He's still, 20, right. 19 years old? I mean, he's young. He blocks shots. He's not just a 7-footer. I mean, they talk about guys like Durant who are legit 7-footers shooting threes. This guy's 7'3". He's knocking down 3-pointers. He's blocking shots. I mean, he could legitimately do everything on a basketball court. That's a guy I would not want to see anybody else who has the kind of firepower to even come close to rivaling the Cavs. I don't want to see anybody getting a hold of the Knicks' perspective, though. I wonder if Phil Jackson's almost looking at, like, I have absolutely screwed up so bad in my time here that there's no way in hell Porzingis is going to re-sign with us when it comes time for him to have his first new contract. So let me go ahead and flip him and get the number 3 pick this year and take someone who could be an impact player maybe 5-6 years down the line once we're not a complete dumpster fire like we are now. That might be the kind of attitude that they're looking at because, quite frankly, the Knicks are going to be trash for a long, long time unless things change dramatically.
Yeah, this is the guy who had such a great reputation throughout the basketball community and really sports in general. When you said Phil Jackson, like, there was a reverence about him. It's like, oh man, Phil Jackson. But now it's like he's a joke. He's almost this guy. There was somebody who was willing to sign, not individually, but together. And I mean, I do think it was a trade, right? For Rose and Noah. Didn't they ship Lopez, Jerry and Grant, and some other bums? to
think Rose
the.
was trade, but no, it was an outright free agent signing.
But still, he made a conscious decision that those were two guys that he wanted to sign. That was something he said was a priority. How in the hell in 2016 was that a priority? That, to me, when I saw that, I was like, this guy just has lost all touch with reality. And then, I'm not a believer in Carmelo Anthony. I think his skill set has diminished. He's been through a lot of injuries, a lot of, and morale, man. Playing there and just never being able to achieve success, and watching someone like LeBron, who has, done so much coming out. I think they came out the same year, right?
Same year. They were actually co-rookies of the year in the 03-04 season. 04, they were co-rookie of the year. I mean, it's not like LeBron was head and shoulders above him from the jump.
And you have to say that the trajectory of their careers looks like this. It doesn't look very very good. It's LeBron has gone on to best player in the game hype. And I was thinking about it this morning. There's at least 30 players in the NBA that I would take over Carmelo Anthony at this point. There's nobody I would take over LeBron James. Like, none. Zero. So that says a lot about where he's gone. And the Knicks, I don't know what they're going to do. I mean, if they cut bait with Carmelo Anthony, you're right. Like, that's something that Phil Jackson is probably going to do, just because I don't think Carmelo wants to be there. But that's going to affect Porzingis, because his mentality is going to be that this team doesn't want to try to win. If you're getting rid of a guy who's Carmelo Anthony, even if you don't think he's that good, like I don't think he's that good, but still, I would still keep him over what's going to be available. No one's going to want to come play for New York. Are you kidding me? You're not going to see CP3. You're not going to see Blake. You're not going to see Gordon Hayward. These are all the top of the line. Kyle Lowry's not going there. LaMarcus Aldridge isn't getting traded there. There's nobody that's going in free agency that's jumping out and say, the place I want to be is in New York, and it's the biggest market in the world, potentially, and they don't want to be there.
And I think that's something we've seen consistently over the past 5-6 years, and it's surprised a lot of people. It may start to change out west, but you've seen these two huge markets, these two teams, the Knicks and Lakers, who are just iconic for the basket of going out and signing these impact free agents. And up until this point, maybe it changes next summer and Paul George goes to the Lakers. But as of right now, both of these franchises have struck out every single time they've made runs at these big free agents. They're clearing up cap space. They're not re-signing their younger guys. They're making trades at some points where they're trying to dump salary, clear salary space. And what it ends up with is these players are choosing to go with another organization that's proved themselves to be more functional or less dysfunctional. I'm not sure what the best way to phrase that is. But regardless, they're going to organizations with other players who are already intact, where they feel like they could win. I mean, Kevin Durant, did he seriously entertain the Knicks or the Lakers? No, of course not. I mean, these guys want to go where they could win. They want to go where there's other star players playing. And until some of these young guys for either team begin to develop, of course, like we just talked about, with Porzingis, you've got a legitimate star right now, someone who's very on the cusp of being a superstar in the NBA. A very marketable player. I know his jersey's very high on the top selling jersey list. This is a guy, if you're in New York City, you should be selling this guy as the future of the entire league and trying to put pieces around him that complement his game and give him an opportunity to just get better and better. But instead, Phil Jackson's out there dangling him to teams and making trade offers. Like, it's a crazy situation. And it almost, like I mentioned earlier, it just kind of screams of Jackson basically saying, we're finished, we're not going to be able to compete, and this guy is going to leave as soon as he hits free agency, so I'm going to try to get as big of a haul as I could get for him now.
Yeah, and while Jackson's dangling him out there, he's also like shooting himself in the foot, both in every way possible, by talking about how Porzingis didn't come to his exit interview at the end of the season. So first of all, that's not going to build loyalty with a player. You know, he's not going to want to come back for you, and you're kind of doing damage in your own trade talks. So why do I want to trade for a guy who you're essentially talking down to? I know the basketball talent's there, but now is there something behind the scenes that doesn't meet the eye? There's just not a lot of intelligence going through the mind of Phil Jackson. But I'll tell you what, One place where there was a lot of intelligence wasn't in Chicago, but it was definitely in Minnesota, with Tom Thibodeau being able to pull off what has to be as close to non-consensual sex as anything else that I can think of, trading a guy who collectively was, the offensive rookie of the year before the season started last year, and Chris Dunn, that just did not come together whatsoever. The defense is there, but the offense, a tremendous liability. Put him together with Zach LaVine, put him with the 7th pick, gets back Jimmy Butler. I'm a fan of this. I didn't want to see them, and it was irony too, because I recorded the first podcast that day, and that's what I said, is the Wolves are going to trade for Butler tonight. But my pick was that they were going to give up Rubio Deng in the 7th to get Butler. And the reason I wanted to see that is because I think that Nemanja Bjelica can play the 4. He doesn't give you that same type of style as Deng, but he gives you a little more versatility in what he does. You could still have Levine and Shabazz Muhammad coming off the bench. And then Tyus Jones, in my opinion, is just an underrated point guard. Like, he's undersized, doesn't have the skill of an undersized guy like Isaiah Thomas, so it's a little bit tough to really believe that he could go out there and play as a starting point guard, but they could have gone into free agency and gotten someone. But still, I think that's a good trade. I like Levine, but knowing that Butler's going to be there, from a fantasy perspective, which at some point this podcast will be about, that's a huge bump for Jimmy Butler, because with Tom Thibodeau, you know one thing. The starters are playing 42 minutes a game. So right off the bat, you're getting 4 more minutes out of a star player. Nothing changes for him. Nothing really changes for Wiggins. Nothing changes for Rubio, and nothing changes for Towns. I mean, it's really a perfect situation, in my opinion.
I think that's a situation where that team, already, we had talked about it last season. I know they're one of the teams that you've been hyping up as not only one of the most exciting in the game, but a team that legitimately has a chance to make some noise in the next couple years and maybe even step up to the point where they could be a threat to the Warriors here at some point in time. And for a while, I like Wiggins overall as a player, but I felt like in today's NBA, the way these teams are stacking themselves up and building super teams, Wiggins has got to be your 3rd best player for you to really have a legitimate shot of building a championship team around that core. Now that's what they've got. They've got Karl Anthony Towns as their star and their centerpiece. Jimmy Butler is the 2nd best player, and Andrew Wiggins. That is an interesting team. The one concern I've heard some people mention, and legitimately seems like a concern, they might lack a little shooting, but that's something you could always go out and grab some role players, some spot-up shooters to add to the team. Karl Anthony Towns, he's going to see a lot of double teams in the low post, opportunity to kick out to open 3-point shooters. All of these guys are going to be guys who could create for themselves, but in Thibodeau's system, where they play a tough, hard, grinded-out defensive style of basketball, I think they all suit that system as well. That's going to be a very scary team to go up against. And just back to another point, when I originally saw the trade, I did not see that the 16th pick was included. My initial impression, of course, excellent trade for Minnesota. A+ if you're rating the trade on that type of scale. I thought the Bulls got back a pretty decent package because they made it clear what direction they're going. I just saw them because I'm following my Cavs more than I'm following anything else. And yes, coincidentally, I am wearing an Orlando Magic jersey right now. Don't let that distract you from the fact that this is old school right here. How many people remember Dennis Scott, 3D? This was on the Penny Hardaway Shaq teams, but let me digress and get back to what I was saying. I thought the Bulls actually did pretty well in what they got for Butler. They didn't go out and kind of decide, we're going to waffle back and forth. Wade picked up his option, so let's get a player and let's stay competing for the 8th, 7th, 6th seed in the East and get bounced out of the playoffs in the first round every year. They made it clear that we're going in a completely different direction. Chris Dunn was a highly regarded player it was Providence, right? Not Seton Hall. Providence?
Yeah, Seton Hall was Isaiah Whitehead.
Okay. Big East schools. I was getting the two mixed up. I was almost positive it was Providence, but before I threw it out there, I wanted to fact check with a true expert here. But yeah, when he was coming out of Providence, this guy was legitimately someone who people were talking about as being an impact player out of that draft. There was talk of the Bulls trading Butler straight up for that draft pick last year. Of course, it didn't come to fruition, and Butler had another great season in Chicago, but Chris Dunn, I mean, you've seen a lot of guys come in the NBA as rookies, and they don't have the type of rookie season that you expect them to have. And then later on, I mean, there's also guys who come in the league and they set the world on fire from the beginning. But I could still see Chris Dunn being a very good player in this league. They went out and they got him. They also grabbed, number 7th overall pick, a player, to be honest, I'm not all that familiar with. We'll get the scouting report from you here in just a second. And a young guard like Zach LaVine, who it seems like he's been in the league forever, winning dunk contests and stuff, but he's, 21 years old still? I think the Bulls did well in the trade. I would have loved to see them hang on to that 16th pick and take another young player to kind of build towards the future. But for one, I think all signs are going to point towards this is a youth movement. They're building towards the future. They don't want to win games this season. That's obviously the goal. So I don't think Dwayne Wade's going to be there much past the All-Star break, if even that long. They'll probably end up buying out the contract. They'll part ways amicably, and Wade will be able to latch onto a contender, Cleveland. And, yeah, I know. You've already told me your opinion on that one. But I don't think the Bulls did as bad as a lot of people in the media are trying to portray it, as if they got completely fleeced for Jimmy Butler. I think some of the other options I've heard in the market, I'm not sure if the rumor's true or not, but people were saying that Danny Ainge was unwilling to part with the number 3 pick to get him. So when you look at, of course, the sources are never going to be 100% accurate. They're never going to tell the whole story. But from what I've seen, at least, of proposed trades and what people were offering the Chicago Bulls for Jimmy Butler, I think they did pretty well.
Well, my perspective is always just to take the sure thing. Like, in drafting situations, it's great that this was a great class. We've heard that every year. And we end up with Anthony Bennett as a first pick, and you have to go down to 15 to Giannis before you find a guy who's really been a basketball player. So, I from that perspective, I like it. LaVine, young, coming off an ACL injury. I don't think he's ready to start the season. I think he's like February. So, I don't think it's just a plug-and-play situation where he comes in and plays right away. Harry Giles or Henry Giles, I know nothing about college basketball. Honestly, least favorite sport. It's too slow. Just, I can't get into it. And I don't know if his name's Harry Giles or Henry Giles. I think it's Harry. But I talked with someone over the weekend, and they were telling me that they really hated the pick because this guy came back from injury, or he never came back from injury, wasn't. And it just gets down to this debate, and that's nothing I really want to talk about because I'm not really well informed enough to make my own opinion, but sports has gone awry in the fact that way too often you're seeing people drafted because of their athletic ability over their ability to actually play the sport. And to me, that becomes concerning. Like, why the hell would you take somebody based on their athletic ability? You know they actually have to play to be good. They have to know something about basketball. It's cute to think that you can teach them, but you're setting yourself up for failure, like, right away. So, I don't know. Well, it remains to be seen what's going to happen with that deal. I think the Timberwolves are now in a position where, especially depending on what they do in free agency, and they have money to spend, they have to make the playoffs this year.
I'd say they should definitely be a team who is, they're not going to be one of the top seeds in the West, but 6, 7, 8 seed, I can't imagine them not making the playoffs. Back to what you were saying a second ago, it's been going on for far too long now. Really back when we were kids, basically, is the last time they were drafting players based upon their merit. I mean, probably the best example of that, of what you just pointed out, taking athleticism and the measurables over a guy who's proven. The Atlanta Hawks, I can't quote whatever year it was, 05 maybe. The Atlanta Hawks had a glaring hole at point guard, and they went out and they take a guy coming off just 1 year in college, freakishly athletic Marvin Williams, over Chris Paul and Darren Williams. Leave both those guys on the board at number 2 when they desperately needed a point guard. And, well, I'm getting attacked by my little puppy here. Yeah, they desperately need a point guard, and they're going out and grabbing Marvin Williams. And we've seen, I mean, he's a decent player. He's a solid role player in the NBA. But to take that guy and to leave Chris Paul on the board, to leave Darren Williams on the board, even though he's far past his prime, but the years that he had in the league, elite level with Utah, and then the first couple years in Brooklyn, I believe they were still New Jersey maybe, but it's crazy when you look at that type of thing. I think a lot of it is there's teams that are just going in different directions. You know, you're either in the NBA, you're either competing for a championship or you're building to the point of competing for a championship. And I think the worst place you could be stuck in NBA basketball is somewhere in the middle. If you're a team like Minnesota that's on the rise, you've got a lot of young talent, you've got the potential to actually be a championship contender within the next few years. That's one thing. But if you're a team where most of your players are already late 20s to early 30s, you have a core of talent, and you're making the 7th, 8th, even the 4th or 5th seed in the playoffs every year, but legitimately you don't have a chance to make it by the big dogs in your conference, at a certain point in time, you have to make the decision of, where are we going here? Most likely those teams don't have the financial flexibility where they could go out and add another max-type player, another star. The trade assets they have are players that are already established. So probably the best example of this, I feel like I'm picking on the Hawks here, but the Hawks for really the last 10 years have been stuck in the same holding pattern where they're going to make the playoffs every single year, but they don't have enough to win. And until they tear that entire roster down and trade all these good veteran players and get some young assets out of the deal and build through the draft, and you got to get lucky too. So much of it is about luck, winning the lottery, even getting second or third out of a lottery pick, and being able to draft and doing it in a season where there's actually a legitimate star available and not a season where Anthony Bennett ends up being the number one pick. But there's so much that goes into building an NBA roster and building a championship contender that there's a lot required. So to me, the worst place to be stuck is that purgatory between being a championship contender and just being a team that's tanking and in rebuilding mode. So I think the Bulls, clearly with that trade, they made their decision. We're not going to be stuck in the middle anymore. We're going to tank. We're going to be a terrible team this year. Like you alluded to, Levine's injured, so he's not going to be playing for a while. They're adding simply young players. Most likely will cut ties with Dwayne Wade at some point in the season, and they're going to be one of the worst teams in basketball and hope that they can land one of the top picks next year in June.
Yeah, and the Hawks are actually looking to go that route as well. It remains to be seen whether they bring Paul Millsap back, and really outside of him, it is younger talent surrounding that team. So that could be the movement they take. Hey, I wanted to talk Cavs a little bit because I saw some news about them yesterday, I believe it was, and it immediately gave me an erection because it talked about the Cavs sending Kevin Love to Denver, getting Paul George, and then I think Fareed going to... I couldn't make out whether it was Fareed going to Indiana or Fareed coming back to Cleveland, but I know that there were a lot of moving pieces. I, for one, don't think that... I think the Cavs are in a really tight position where the biggest unfortunate situation for the Cavs is that they didn't get lucky, and I'm using the term luck because I believe that luck is something that you create through hard work and determination, but the Cavs didn't get lucky in the fact that 3 of their top 4 players happened to be drafted on contracts that weren't massive, so that the Warriors were able to bring somebody else in, like Durant. The Cavs were the opposite direction, where they just re-upped Kyrie at a pretty big contract and then brought back the huge contract of LeBron and a big contract with Love. So I'm of the belief that I don't believe that Love for Paul George really does that much for the team. I think you're just replacing one guy who you're thinking is going to come in and make a huge impact and does what Love does, where he makes a huge impact. The city just shits on him because he didn't do enough of what they thought he was supposed to do. 18 rebounds in a game is not enough. But for me, I'm looking at Denver, one of my favorite teams to watch. Like the teams I like, Phoenix, Denver, Minnesota, Milwaukee, a lot of these young gun teams that team with Jokic, who is potentially the most talented basketball player in all of the NBA, raw as all hell, but the dude can pass, he can shoot, he can move. He, to me, seems like a once-in-a-lifetime player, honestly. I'm not saying he's at a LeBron or Durant level. I'm just saying what he does some things they can't do, but they do a lot of stuff that he can't do, more stuff that he can't do. But looking at the composition of that team, where you've got guys like Chris Paul now want to go play ball in Denver. Gordon Hayward said he wouldn't mind going at Denver. I mean, taking Kevin Love to Denver and a team that could still spend in free agency, that's big. So I do want to get your thoughts on that. Obviously, we could talk about the Cavs as well, because there's no way we're going to get through an episode without you talking about what you think the Cavs are going to do. But what are your thoughts on Love, that whole situation, basically?
All right, I'll go ahead and give my thoughts on Denver first, because my thoughts on the Cavaliers are probably going to be a little more long-winded. As a Cavaliers fan, a diehard fan who's been watching this team since the Mark Price, Larry Nance, Hot Rod Williams, Brad Daugherty glory days of when, I was just a little kid and watching my dad enjoy the team and watching our hearts be broken consistently by Michael Jordan over the years as well. I love Kevin Love. I love him as a player. I think that what he did when he came to Cleveland, the way he sacrificed, this was a guy who was averaging legitimately, 27 points and close to 15 rebounds a game with Minnesota. The media was, they were touting him as the best power forward in the NBA. He was putting up major numbers, but it was on a losing team. And Kevin Love said, I want to go to a winner. And this is a guy who put his money where his mouth is. So many times we've seen guys say, I want to play for a winner. And they get the chance, they go and play for a winner, and all of a sudden their stats are way down, they're getting flack from the media, and they bail. They don't want to be there. They want to go somewhere else. They want to get the accolades themselves instead of being a part of something special. Kevin Love, to me, made such a huge sacrifice to fit in with this Cavaliers team, and it took a little bit of time. But to me, I don't think any reasonable basketball mind would disagree with this comment. Yeah, his numbers weren't great in the finals last year when we finally hoisted that Larry O'Brien trophy and ended 52 years of misery in Northeast Ohio. But we don't win that championship without Kevin Love. Kevin Love's contributions throughout the playoffs, and even in Game 7, people were criticizing his stat line. I think he had 7 points and 9 rebounds, or 9 points and 11 rebounds or something. He's making timely plays. He's getting rebounds. Of course, his scoring has drastically been affected ever since he came to Cleveland. I think Kevin Love, to me, injury concerns aside, because he has gotten banged up from time to time. He's had some serious injuries in his time in Cleveland. He had a serious injury or two when he was in Minnesota. But mostly it's just kind of nicks and bruises and, things that keep him out a few games. But man, like you mentioned, for him to go to a young team like Denver with all the pieces that they have and to put him in the front court with Jokic, I mean, that's a scary team. I mean, they were, a game away from making the 8th seed this year in the playoffs? Yep. You add Kevin Love to that team, and I guess it all depends what they're giving to Indiana as part of that trade. If they're not giving up too much, and you're replacing Kenny Fareed with Kevin Love, essentially, and maybe a few role players and draft picks, and then, like you said, they've got money, they go out and sign someone in free agency, that's a team to me that could literally kind of skyrocket up the Western Conference standings and be a top 5 seed potentially this season. And with, like you mentioned with Jokic, the guy's still developing. He's got this insane skill set where he could literally be as good as he wants to be, as good as the team and the coaching staff and the training staff are able to develop him to be. That team is going to be someone who nobody's going to want to play in the playoffs. I mean, that's a very interesting trade. Now, most recently I've seen that I don't believe they're actually being a little distracted by the dog here, making sure she's not getting into anything. Okay. Most recently what I saw was Joe Varden, a reporter, a local Northeast Ohio reporter, saying that trade was actually very unlikely and it's most likely not going to go through. But that's one of those deals that, again, I don't know what the specifics of what Indiana would get, but it seems like it could potentially work for everyone. The only way I think that it would work in any way for Cleveland there's 2 things that I think it's contingent upon. One, Fareed has to be coming to Cleveland in that trade because we're going to need him to pick up some of the slack that we're losing on the boards with Kevin Love. Tristan Thompson's a great rebounder. I know everyone wants to focus on the first few games of the finals where he disappeared, didn't play very well, but he is still an elite rebounder, maybe the single best offensive rebounder in the league, one of the top 5 rebounders overall in the entire NBA. Another guy who people complain about his contract now because it's what have you done for me lately? He struggled in the finals. That's another piece. If you don't pay Tristan Thompson what you paid him, and by some chance he calls your bluff and walks and goes to Toronto or whatever he does, Cavaliers don't win that championship last year. He was huge for us last year. This year, he came up short. But the people in Cleveland who are sitting here, they're doing the exact same thing, of course, that they did with Kevin Love. They're saying, we need to get rid of him. Tristan's a bum now. Same thing we heard about Kevin Love last year is what Tristan's going through this year. And they're judging him off of the 2 or 3 worst games, basically, that he's had in his entire career with the Cavaliers uniform. And now they want to basically run him out of town. Tristan Thompson's going to be back, and he's going to be back to being the dominant force he is, the disruptive force he is on the offensive glass, constantly forcing the other team to put 2, sometimes 3 guys on him just to keep him from getting offensive rebounds, keeping the ball alive, creating extra possessions for the Cavs. But back to what I was saying, I always get a little bit off topic and go on tangents. If the Cavaliers get Kenny Fareed back in that trade, and they are extremely confident that they could also land Carmelo Anthony through a buyout. Now, I know we have kind of a different opinion of where Carmelo is in his career. I could agree that he is diminished, but if you can add Carmelo Anthony, and you could add Paul George, and you could bring Kenny Fareed in, then I'm willing to give up Kevin Love. I'm not willing to give up Kevin Love straight up for Paul George in a trade. I think there's too much risk. I think the fact is Love has finally hit his stride for the first time since he's been in Cleveland. He actually made the All-Star team last year. Not that that means anything. I felt like he deserved to make it over, I don't know if it was Millsap or Horford the previous season. But I think Love is finally starting to have that chemistry with the Cavs. And this is my big point. This is the view that I have that's probably unpopular for most people. I don't think the Cavs need to really do anything drastic. Most people look at that series and say, we lost 4-1 to Golden State. You got to blow up the team. You got to get another player to guard Durant. I look at it like this. That third game, we had no business losing that game. It took a great clutch play from Durant. As much as I can't stand the guy, I got to give him credit. He came up huge, hit a big shot, and we did nothing. We did what the Warriors did in Game 7 last year down the stretch, and we didn't score the last 4 minutes of the ballgame. That's the only 2 times in recent history that that's happened in a finals game. No points at all in the last 4 minutes. So if that doesn't happen, you're going back to Oakland, tied 2-2 in the series. You've got a series. And that 5th game that ended up being the elimination game where we got knocked out and the Warriors hoisted their well-deserved championship, if that foul, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and complain and cry about officials, even though you know I enjoy doing that a lot. But the previous game, Kevin Durant got hit in the head on a drive to the basket. He cried about it to the refs. They went and reviewed it and gave it a flagrant foul. He hits LeBron James on the head on an and-one opportunity. Exact same situation, and they don't even call a personal foul. He had 2 fouls on him at that point in time. If they just call a personal foul, that's his 3rd. He's got to go to the bench. And incidentally, right after that missed call, that's when the Warriors go on like a 22-6 run or something, where Durant scores like 12 of those points. That Game 5 could be completely different. I mean, I know I'm talking a lot of ifs. All that matters is what really happens. But if a few breaks go the Cavaliers' way, and I know I'm talking about a couple here, not just one, but 2 or 3 breaks go the Cavaliers' way, you could be looking at the Cavaliers going back home up 3-2 in that series with the exact same roster that we have. So I don't feel like we're that far away, and there's that much of a gap that needs to be closed. Talent-wise, absolutely. The Warriors have more talent than the Cavs. No one can deny it. No one can dispute it. The biggest Cavaliers homer in the world can't say it. But when I look at that series, the way that Game 3 was competitive, and really we let it slip out of our grasp, that series should have been going back to Oakland tied at 2. And at that point in time, anything can happen.
Well, that's a lot of information to digest. There's a few things that I would say. I have a long-standing belief, and I don't ever hesitate to voice it, that one thing that happens a lot is there's stupid management in sports, and the city, the fans in the city where the sports team reside, bitch and whine about it, And honestly, a lot of times they're right. But a lot of Cleveland fans are literally the only sports fans that are less intelligent than the management is. I've heard Browns fans consistently echoing their opinions. They're opining about how this should happen and how that should happen. And I'm listening to it, and I'm just thinking to myself, Lord have mercy. Do you understand how much of an asshole you sound like right now? Because I do, and I can't be the only one. And it's not you. I'm not saying that towards you. I would tell you. I wouldn't have a problem telling you.
Oh, I know that, bro.
It's just the fact that through the whole series, that's one thing, and after the series was worse. Lord have mercy. I had people that I see talking to each other on Facebook about how Russell Westbrook and Anthony Davis and how all of these guys are coming to Cleveland, and I'm like, do you understand how anything works all together? Like, so please explain to me how Russell Westbrook comes to Cleveland. IDK, at that point, I'm already done with the conversation. If you're not an adult enough to fucking say the words instead of spelling them out in an acronym, I'm done with it, okay? I'm not listening to you. I'm over it. But there's no comprehension there for how, in this cap structure, I'm a smart guy. I have no idea how the NBA salary cap works. There's a cap, but you can go over it. But only if it's with existing players and this, that, and the other thing. So looking at how it's set up, I don't even know if the Cavs could take on Carmelo Anthony contract. They'd have to get rid of Korver, who's on a fairly bad contract. I think it's $9.5 million or something like that. And I don't know if it's a player or team option. I was looking at the construct of it, but a lot of the guys who know way more about that than I do seem to think that there's no possibility that the Cavs are going to be able to do anything that doesn't involve trading. So that's a tough situation to be in, and that's essentially what I'm getting at. The Warriors are the same way. Durant's going to take somewhat of a pay cut to keep Livingston and Iguodala there, but they can't add anyone else either. And I've said this, and I'm not afraid to continue to say it. I don't think either of these teams end up in the finals next year.
I was shocked the first time you said that. I really was.
I still say that if you take a Chris Paul and you put him on San Antonio, regardless of whether or not LaMarcus Aldridge leaves, I think they beat the Warriors in 7 games. And if Boston is able to foster along these young guys like Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. Is it Jason Tatum? I think it's whatever. His last name's Tatum. I know that much. And they can get a guy like Hayward in, or even a Serge Ibaka or something like that. I think that they do have the ammunition to take the Cavs to 7. So I just think that this is going to be an interesting situation. For the sake of Cleveland fans, knowing what they've overcome in the last 50 years of franchises, to see the Cavs go to 3 straight finals, to see the Indians go to a World Series where, let's face it, they're probably not going back there this year. But
no business.
Neither is Chicago, so don't feel bad about that. But you don't want to see a guy like Love go just because you lost once. The first series shouldn't even count. The Cavs were playing LeBron James and the fucking Canton Charge alongside with him. So it's a championship for Golden State. I'm not taking that away from them. But LeBron had nobody. I mean, he had Dellavedova, who unquestionably is my least favorite basketball player and possibly the most overrated sports athlete anywhere. He's gritty. He's gritty because he shut down Steph Curry twice. Oh boy, you got a $9 million contract, which really isn't even that much money in the NBA, and you didn't manage to start for the team that played you, or took you on. So, Delly, you can fuck yourself. Anyway, I tend to get heated. I run a little hot. We're running hot here. I hope for the Cavs fans' sake that they don't look at this year as needing to blow up the team, because if you blow up the team, I just don't see what pieces you get to replace. And I've heard Cavs fans like, "Oh, we should trade Kyrie. He can move the ball around," and I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And I'd rather have Curry. That's fine. I might not disagree with you, but you have to know in your heart of hearts that that's not happening. So who would you get that makes you feel good about it? Because a 32-year-old Chris Paul that misses 15 games a year Sure, he might take the cut to play with his buddy LeBron, but if those 15 games happen to be in the playoffs, which all you have to do is rewind the tape 2 years to see that happen in Los Angeles, there's a lot of problems there. Blowing up the franchise isn't going to be the way to go. It's a tough team. It's going to stay tough at least for 3 more years, regardless of who's with LeBron, because he's LeBron James. But we have to agree that there becomes a diminishing return on LeBron James, because we saw it on Kobe Bryant. We saw it on basically every athlete whose name wasn't David Ortiz. And that's just what it's going to come down to. The Cavs have somewhat of a limited window due to where LeBron is at in his career, unless a lot of dominoes fall in their favor.
It's going to come down to it eventually, but do you believe it's going to come down to it soon? I mean, look at the way LeBron's playing at 32 years old.
I'd say 35, then I'd start having questions. So you can have this year, next year, the year after that, then that's when, and this is why I say you don't trade Love, who's 26?
People act like the guy's 40
He's 6 years younger than I am, 7 years younger than I am. He's not 40 years old.
I mean,
Kyrie's going to be like 28. So you're going to have a 28-year-old Kevin Love who will be 7 years younger than LeBron James at that point. You'll have a 26-year-old Kyrie Irving, even a 27-year-old Kyrie Irving. This is why you don't blow up the team.
Couldn't agree with you more. I do have to touch back on one point you made there because, hey, you took a shot at my Cavs fans, and you made another point right afterwards that I'm going to turn around, I'm going to take a shot on a different fan base. Like you said, that first finals between the Cavs and Warriors, I'm not taking anything away from the Warriors. All you could do is beat the team that's on the court with you. And that's what they did. Credit to them. They deserve the 2015 championship. But here's my problem. When I hear Warriors fans cry about last year and say, we lost because Draymond was suspended for 1 game. Draymond Green suspended for 1 game. Cleveland was without Kevin Love for the entire series, without Kyrie Irving ever since overtime of the first game. We played the whole series without 2 all-star players, and they are complaining about having 1 game without Draymond Green, yet they don't sit there and acknowledge and say, oh, well, we didn't deserve the first one, you didn't deserve the last one. It's complete. I mean, if you're talking about a fan base that's short a few marbles, that's got to be the one, right?
Yeah, I think it's every franchise does that. And even if my loyalty ultimately in just about 99% of the situations lies on my wallet. So who's my favorite team? Whoever helps the amount of my wallet go up. Okay, that's what it comes down to. I have no loyalty. I'm a guy that I could like the Warriors last year. If they look like shit to start the year off, I'm probably not watching too many Warriors games. I'm going to be watching the Nuggets. I'm going to be watching the Kings. I'm going to be watching the Suns. I like the players. That's what I like. But especially in that situation, how far gone do you have to be to not realize that this dude brought it on himself? You get technicals by being an asshole. It is literally an asshole penalty. This is why you see Cousins and Rondo, who I love Rondo when he gets a technical, because he's the only player in the NBA that can get a technical just from staring at a referee. It is fantastic. But I agree with you on that point. And that's why I'm happy that when you see me whine about sports, it's just because some official made a stupid call that costed me money. I don't care about this team or that team. I have no loyalties. I like basketball. I like watching the teams. I live in Northeast Ohio. I might watch 5 Cavs games a year. One of them is going to be on Christmas. The other 4 is when I'm going to have a lot of Kyrie or Love in my fantasy lineups. So that's how that goes. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting year to say the least. I'm very excited to see how everything goes. Basketball has been just improving the quality of players coming in and everybody that we get coming out of college and the turnaround we see with these foreign players. Last thing I want to talk about, because I think this is kind of an interesting dynamic here. Is Philadelphia a playoff team this year?
It's so hard to predict that right now because we haven't seen Ben Simmons on a basketball court since LSU. He missed the entire season. I mean, if he's the guy who they thought he was when they drafted him, albeit that he's only 20 years old, we saw there's just so many question marks with Philadelphia. I would say, and this is me kind of hedging my bet basically, because it's hard to give a definitive answer on a team when you have such limited information. Embiid played, what, 35 games? 40 games? 31 games. He looked phenomenal. The guy looks like a future superstar. He looks amazing. But he has been hurt. He was drafted the same year as Andrew Wiggins. Andrew Wiggins has played 3 years in the NBA, and Joel Embiid has played 31 basketball games. So if the guy stays healthy for not even 82 games, but 60 games, that Saric guy looked great. If this rookie Fultz is able to step in and compete and be able to be a guy who could contribute right away, if Simmons is able to do the same thing since he missed his entire rookie season, then yeah, if all those dominoes fall the right way, they are a playoff team.
And I guess it's a question we probably need to revisit in early October, because the perspective I'm sitting at is you've got Fultz, Simmons, Robert Covington, who just does not get enough credit for what he does. He legitimately is one of the better defensive players in all of basketball. At least if not defensive, the dude knows how to steal a basketball, and that goes a long way in point differential. You got Saric, who is a monster. Embiid in 31 games didn't even look like a future superstar. He looked like a present superstar. You still have Jahlil Okafor behind him. You have this great assortment of talent. So what free agents want to come play in Philly? And if you can get some of these Kyle Lowry-like guys, who that was the first thing I heard was Lowry wants to go play in Philly, and now you've got the ability to have Fultz come off the bench initially, and Simmons, I don't know what you do with him, because I thought the whole benefit was was the point forward thing. He's going to play the point from the forward. Do you lose that now with Schultz being out or Fultz being there? But I just think it's an attractive team. If I'm a pending free agent, these Phillies and these Denvers all of a sudden look really attractive to go play with in the long term.
I agree 100%. I think if you're a guy like Kyle Lowry, a team like Philadelphia, where are you going with Toronto? They're kind of a team like we had just talked about with Atlanta. Yeah, they've been near the top of the Eastern Conference the last couple of years. But did anybody reasonably believe, either last year or the year before, outside of Toronto themselves, that city, did anyone believe that they were going to beat the Cavs?
No.
I mean, there was no way. I personally, and of course, I'm a huge Cavs fan, I appreciate the greatness of LeBron James to the point. I feel like you could have no Kyrie Irving, no Kevin Love, and the Toronto Raptors still aren't going to beat the Cavs in a 7-game series. It's not going to happen. So for Kyle Lowry to move on, I think that would be a logical move to go somewhere like that. I think the best move for Kyle Lowry, assuming the Spurs were to strike out on the Chris Paul sweepstakes, would be go down to San Antonio and be a part of Greg Popovich's system, be a part of one of the greatest organizations in the history of professional sports. I mean, that would be an ideal fit for him. So I agree with what you're saying from the player's perspective. Philadelphia is now an attractive destination. From management's perspective, though, if I'm Philadelphia, and I've been selling my fans all these years on trust the process, is now really the time to sign a player to a max contract or a large contract? I would maybe wait 2 more years, because look at Kyle Lowry. He's getting up there in age. By the time those guys are legitimately ready to compete, like we were saying, if things fall the right way for them, if they stay healthy,
they're an HC.
It could be a playoff team this year. Yeah, exactly. But they're 3-4 years away from being even close to being a contending team. They absolutely have all the pieces if these pieces pan out the way that experts project them to and the way they look like they have the potential to. But I personally, if I'm running the Philadelphia 76ers, I'm not going out and I'm trying to sign a max contract this offseason. I'm probably not going out and trying to sign a guy to a max contract next offseason. I'm probably waiting 2 years, and then I'm looking at signing a guy to a 5-year deal who could be a part of that team when they're ready to take the step to the next level where they could actually be a force in the East. By then, LeBron James is going to be nearing that 35 mark that you mentioned. The Celtics, I like, not to go and switch to another team, but another team in the Atlantic Division. The Celtics, I like what they're doing. I think that people are making it seem like Danny Ainge is just asking for too much in these trades, and that's why they're keeping these young guys. But me personally, and we'll see We'll see how the offseason plays out. If they do land a Gordon Hayward, if they're able to swing a trade for Paul George or someone to help them win now. But I don't think the idea of them waiting out LeBron's prime is all that bad either. I think they've got so many assets going forward to the future. And yeah, they had the 1 seed this year. But reasonably speaking, we saw those two teams on the court together, and they really didn't belong on the court together in the conference finals. There was one team who was going to the finals in the East, and throughout all the struggles of the Cavs throughout the season, I know a lot of fans were complaining, saying we're going to lose in the first round, we're going to lose. And speaking to your point earlier of the base being a little bit overreactive, I guess is the kind way that I'll put it. I won't be nearly as blunt as you, but we're going to lose to Washington, we're going to lose to this team. I never had any doubt, even when they were struggling, they were going to make it to the finals. I didn't have the utmost confidence that we would win the finals, and of course we didn't, but us making it to the finals again, the Cavaliers making it to the finals for LeBron James' 7th straight season, for the 3rd straight year for the Cavs, it was all but a formality. Everyone knew it was going to happen. I think the Celtics, their fans, I think, are getting a little antsy, but I would strongly consider trading Isaiah Thomas while his value is at its highest and building through these draft players, and you're not setting yourself back too far. And then in 3 years, like we talked about, when LeBron is out of his prime, then all of a sudden, Boston and Philadelphia become the 2 teams to beat in the East, barring some other catastrophic trade that shakes up the landscape. But those are the 2 teams that are vying for the number 1 seed in the East, that are going to be possibly playing in 3 or 4 conference finals against each other in a row because of all the young assets and flexibility with the payroll that Boston has, and because of all the, really the same exact thing with Philadelphia, except they've just got so much young talent where it's crazy to think how good Philadelphia could be in 5 years. It really is.
We're speaking about the Eastern Conference, and there's one team that I mentioned a little bit earlier, and it's a great place to close, I think. And this team gave the Cavs some struggles this year, and I think had Jabari Parker not gone down this year, and now they bring in DJ Wilson, another 6'10" forward, to play with Parker, Thonmaker, Malcolm Brogdon, who's maybe not the best offensive player, but comes from that Virginia system where it's gritty defense. The team is literally just loaded with potential talent. And I think I've always said that, like, what could put the Celtics ahead of the Cavs this year would be, this is a bad example. Let me leave him out. I was going to say Dwight Howard, but I don't know where he's at in terms of how much he could do at his age. But DeMarcus Cousins, Rudy Gobert, guys who can get in there, and all of a sudden Tristan isn't the best guy at what he does on the court. Because to your point, like you said, he was a big reason why they won. And he was a big reason this time in the games they were competitive in. And if you neutralize that, then it's back to the drawing board for the Cavs. But I don't think, to me, Horford, yes, he's a double-double guy, but he's a baseline double-double or triple-double guy. Like, his triple-doubles are 10-10-10. He's not DeMarcus Cousins, who's going to put up 47 points and 22 rebounds. A game changer. Horford is a great hand. He's an excellent player, but I want a guy in that 5 hole that can dominate. And that's where these guys are coming up short, because Tristan can dominate Horford. For the most part, Tristan can dominate Gortat. He's just not as physical as he needs to be, and when he tries to get there, he's a mental midget, and he starts to get too rough in there. So, I mean, that's where I'm looking at it. Gordon Hayward, great, but Jay Crowder's been fine. That's where you need to pick up the slack. Now you shift Horford into the 4 spot. He's playing the power forward role, which I just feel like it's better suited for him in terms of stretching the floor, and you got a guy that has a big body that can get under there and bang with Tristan Thompson. That's my take on it. That's why Monroe is the ideal guy to do that, but Jason Kidd doesn't like him.
Here's the I think you would probably answer my question when you went further clarified about Boston needing a guy who is a double-double, a guy who could legitimately light up the score sheet the way that DeMarcus Cousins can do. what I was going to say originally when you were talking about how they need a big presence in the paint, someone who could rebound, someone who could make Tristan Thompson uncomfortable. If that's really what they're looking for, why didn't they accept the Clippers' offer of the number 3 pick for DeAndre Jordan? That seems like it'd be a pretty good fit. Now, how much of DeAndre Jordan is Chris Paul? I guess
that's a really good question. And the thing with DeAndre Jordan too is you get a little bit of perimeter defense with him too. He's not the Dwight Howard dragging himself across the court. For a big guy, his whole push is athleticism because it sure as hell ain't his shooting. But I think it just comes down to, like, and even me as a GM, if someone was like number 3 for DeAndre, I'd just get the fuck out of here. There's no way. Yes, DeAndre Jordan is a good player, but if you're drafting it at the 3rd position in what is supposed to be the most loaded draft in so long, and all of these guys are supposed to be, and I don't even think it's really that. I think that's what it was blown up to be for TV ratings. I think it was just a situation where the difference between these players is basically nothing in terms of, like, you know, this guy's talented, but the 10th pick is this much less talented. So it's really tough to say. The more I think about it, the more I'm saying, yeah, you should probably do it, because why not just take the guy who you know can get the job done?
Yeah, I think we're both kind of walking both paths on this one, because, like I just said a minute ago, if it was me and I was running Boston, I would want to build my team out for 2-3 years from now. But I do agree that a guy who could really cause some problems in the paint, who could block some shots, who could be an elite rebounder, would be a huge, because rebounding is by far their biggest weakness. They need a guy who could rebound, and that's something they don't have.
And look at what they have. They're going to get rid of Amir Johnson, so you have Horford. I'm not even going to mention Tyler Zeller because he's not an actual basketball player.
That name should be censored on this podcast. Like, can we
Z-word.
Have a fact
on my
here
college
we
football
censor
podcast, on the college football podcast and my fantasy football podcast, I relentlessly tear Christian Hackenberg apart. Like, there's not an episode that goes by that I don't just relentlessly tear into him. But I'm going to do the same with Zeller. Like,
is he still in college? Hackenberg?
Huh? No, he's with the Jets now, which is the equivalent of a mid-range college team. But
about the same.
Yeah, when they were putting Zeller on the court in the Eastern Conference Finals, I'm literally sitting there like, this guy didn't play in the regular season. Why did your management decide that the finals was the best time to put him on the court? He was a liability. Like, if you go back, and there has to be a Tyler Zeller highlight reel, because he's running into his own players, completely inept to where the coverage needs to be. But going back to my point, outside of him, you have Kelly Olynyk. So what they did is they positioned their front court similar to how the Cavs wanted it, except they don't have a Tristan Thompson. They have a Love, they have a Channing Frye, but they don't have a guy who could actually just sit there and collect the boards, and that's a big mistake. Big mistake.
Need someone to do that dirty work. Back to your point about Milwaukee. Milwaukee is a team I love. I mean, they are so long and athletic. Like, literally 1-5 Milwaukee. I look at that team 2 years ago, the year the Cavs won it all. And of course, I always use that as my barometer for things. I have to remind myself of it, the mentality of a Cleveland fan. Been so long. But anyways, that year I actually, and of course they ended up missing the playoffs, I predicted before the season that the Milwaukee Bucks would be the number 2 team in the Eastern Conference, the 2nd seed, because they were coming off a year the season before where Jabari Parker was hurt, which he was again last year. He was hurt in 2015, and they still ended up making, I believe, the 6th seed in Jason Kidd's first year as the coach there. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking, this team, I mean, they have got so much potential. Giannis is the Greek Freak is such a perfect nickname for that guy because he is a freakish athlete. The things he could do on a basketball court. I mean, it's on. You look at 2 guys who are just freaks of nature, him and who we were talking about earlier, who began talking about, Porzingis. I mean, those 2 guys, oh my gosh, it's unreal. But I love what Milwaukee has. I love what they're doing. I love the way they're building that team. And they are. I definitely, that was an oversight on my part when I omitted them when I was talking about teams who could be the heir apparent in the Eastern Conference within the next few years, assuming something happens with the Cavs or LeBron begins to slow down. But, man, the Milwaukee Bucks, they're a tough team. They got talent at every single position. And really all they need, in my opinion, to be a team to take the step to the next level and legitimately have a chance to make it to the conference finals next year is Jabari Parker to stay healthy. That's all they need right now.
Yeah, that's the barometer, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens because I think it's now 2 separate surgeries on both knees. Oh. I'm not sure what it is. I didn't do my due diligence and check, but I think that's what it is. So that's going to be tough. Talked a lot of basketball here. Probably a good point to wrap it up. We're hitting the hour mark, which was always a good time to end it. That's about how long my workouts take. I'm just kidding. I'm not even going a third of that time. But anyway, you can find him on Twitter at Boxing Addict. That's correct.
Boxing Addiction.
Boxing Addiction. That's correct. I'm not correct for once. There's a first time for everything, so we've now seen it here. You could find me at Nick from CWE. You can find the company at Research and Win on Twitter. And we will join you again later this week with more basketball talk.